Okay, so I'm going to make a little bread today. My basic recipe is 1 cup of water, 2 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of salt. The recipe scales really well, so if I'm just going to make a loaf for the family, which just be the 4 of us, got half a cup of water. It's really important to use filtered or bottled water because we're trying to grow yeast here, and yeast doesn't like chlorine or chloramine, which the municipal system puts in the water. So we've got the water there. We'll go ahead, pre-measured a half a teaspoon of salt. So like I said, the recipe scales really easy. Then we got a half a teaspoon of yeast. You can use more yeast, you can use less yeast, doesn't really matter. The more yeast you use, the faster it's going to rise. Less yeast you use, the slower it rises. The slower the bread rises, the more of a sourdough flavor it'll pick up. You might like that, you might not. Now we're going to go ahead and add the flour. Now, important piece on the flour here. The basic recipe is 2-to-1 for flour, but flour is like a sponge. It just soaks up moisture. Now, if you've got a lot of moisture in your house, your flour will already have that moisture in it, and you'll need more of it to get your dough to the right consistency, because it's like adding water with the flour. Now, if you're in a really dry place, you'll need less flour, because that flour will just absolutely suck up the water that's in there. Now, I screwed up. If you saw what I did, I added 3 cups of flour of half a cup increments. So I have 1.5 cups, and I only had a cup's worth of liquid. Oh no, what do I do? What do I do? Panic time, right? Now just add a little more water. It'll be fine. And you end up with a little more bread. So I'm going to put a little splash in here. And not terribly scientific. So we're going for consistency. So it's about a 1/4 cup of water. And we'll need to, of course, add a little bit more salt. I don't have a tripod, so I'm going to put you down and grab that salt. Okay, so I added that little bit of extra water and that little bit of extra salt. Funny story about salt. It turns out that if you use like the coarse sea salt or rock salt or even kosher salt, the larger granules weigh less. So some recipes will call for a certain amount of salt and not specify kosher or sea salt, and you'll make it and it tastes way too salty. That's because the recipe was actually made for the kosher or sea, and you ended up using normal, like Morton's granulated. So when I talk about using 1 teaspoon of salt, I actually mean 1 teaspoon of like regular just table salt. If you want to get fancy and use rock salt, that's cool. You'll just have to double up. All right, now you can see this. It sticks to my hand a little bit. It's basically the consistency of Play-Doh. It's not hard. It's not like clay. You don't want it to be like clay. That just makes a nasty, bad kind of brick loaf. The other thing is, I'm not really worried about kneading it and making a bunch of gluten. We'll worry about that later. You just kind of want to get it all mixed up nice and no big flour clumps. Alright, so now I'm just going to set this on the counter. It's, I don't know, not that warm in here. I'd say it's probably like 68 or something. You just set it there, leave it on the counter, and in a couple of hours when I want a loaf of bread, we'll take a look at it and then we'll make it into a loaf. Okay, and we're back with the bread. I mean, it's a little more than doubled in size. And we got Rosie in the background there. And go ahead and turn that out. Yep, Rosie's there. Now in the oven right now, we have it preheating, and we're going to put it on a pizza stone to cook it. You want the pizza stone in the oven when you're preheating, because the pizza stone really doesn't care about your hopes and dreams, and it doesn't really care about your bread or your pizza. If it doesn't come out, it usually means that your pizza stone wasn't warm. and that's why the bottom of your dough or your bread or your pizza is doughy. So make sure you heat up your pizza stone first. I'm going to put a little flour down here and start turning that out, but like I said before, no tripod, so I got to stop. Okay, so I turned the bread out onto the flour, and I'm just going to kind of roll it, and turn it, and move it, and stretch it, and form it. Then I'm going to do this thing I said before about making the gluten. I read somewhere that really the most important thing was to have that stretch in the outside part of the crust. The interior of the bread, it's not all that important for. So I'm actually going to kind of twist this guy, and that's how we're going to kind of form that outside layer on the bread. All right, back to pause and use so I can get that pizza stone out of the oven and get this guy set on top of that pizza stone. All right, so we got the loaf formed. I'm going to tap a little flour onto this pizza stone here. It's up to temp, 400 degrees, and we'll be right back in a second. All right, slid the bread right onto the stone here. Going to go ahead and put the stone in the oven, and then we will have bread. All right, it's time to rescue the bread from the hot oven. Had it baking for about 25 minutes at 400 degrees. This is just a tiny little loaf here. There we go. And we'll go ahead and clean that up a little bit and let it cool down. All right, so we got a little bit of flour on the bread. I just kind of like to take a brush here like this, brush that little excess off. I mean, nobody really likes the taste of raw flour. Roll it over. There we go. Here in a moment, I'll go ahead and slice into it and we can see what it looks like. All right, got the bread all cleaned up. Let it cool down here for about 5 minutes. It's still kind of steamy, but it's time for a victory lap. All right, so got a couple pieces sliced up, some butter, it's good stuff.